We're here this afternoon to talk about climate justice, to talk about things that we have all seen all of our lives and just never paid attention to. For some of us, we know about all of the injustice, all of the racial tension, all of the whatever that goes on in this country and in this world. But when it comes to climate change, it was a non-issue. So this group has come together to look at that issue. Because for sure, with all of the other racial things going on, when it comes to climate, it's not going to make any difference whether you're black or white. Because it's going to take us all out. So that if we don't get together on this issue, we're all lost. And maybe in the meantime, we can take care of the racial injustices as well. And just tie it all up so that finally everybody will be able to just be them and do the things that they do best. Isn't that an idea? Yeah. Can we work with that? Thank you. We have some panelists up here, and I just want them to quickly, even though they've got food in their hands, some of them, to just say who they are and who they're representing today before we get started. We'll start here with Nikki.
Just name and who we are?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Nikki Fortunato Bass with the Partnership for Working Families, which is one of the networks that Power is connected to. And I came out here from Oakland, California. Really excited to be here.
Oh my
God. My name is Reverend Gregory Holston. I am first the senior pastor of James Memorial United Methodist Church here in the Germantown section of Philadelphia. And I'm also the executive director of Power. Power is an affiliate of the PICO Network and also Partnership for Working Families. And we're so glad that Nikki is here with us today.
Thank you.
Bonjour, everyone. My name is Colette Pichon Battle. I'm the Executive Director of the U.S. Human Rights Network. We are headquartered in Atlanta with offices in New York. I'm from South Louisiana, a Bayou girl, but excited to be here representing a national network of about 400 grassroots organizations, all working to advance a human rights movement in the United States.
Yeah.
Last but not least,
Hi, I'm Rosalind Wojcicki. I am the president of Unite Here, Local 274. We work in coalition with Power all the time. If you don't know who we are, Unite Here Philadelphia is the union of hospitality workers in Philadelphia and the surrounding area. We represent hotel workers, food service workers down at the stadiums, the airport, newly unionized airport. Thanks to our work together. And the school district of Philadelphia is also part of Unite Here Philadelphia, the school district.
thank you very much. Now, I did neglect to introduce myself. I guess that would be some good manners if I would do that. My name is Frances Upshaw. I am on the Power Board, and I serve in a whole bunch of other areas. So I'm happy to be here, happy to be your facilitator. And I want to suggest that you turn your phones down so we don't hear all of this stuff going on. Thank you very much. Okay, and we're going to have a conversation this afternoon. I'm going to throw a couple of questions out here. If you have some questions to address to our panel, please feel free. This will only work if everybody is involved doing it. So I will start to any of you who want to answer. Can you share with us a small story about what brought you to climate justice and jobs as a way to drive your work for justice? Who wants to take that one? Colette, I heard you this morning. You can answer that.
I was trying to be quiet.
No. You're in the wrong seat for that.
This question, I've heard this question for about 10 years now, and it's always a really sobering moment that really brought me into this work. I come out of the Katrina zone, working in Katrina and BP recovery. Before that, I was a corporate lawyer and had no intention of doing justice work or climate work or anything like that. But when you see your community completely wiped out, it's enough to shift your trajectory for sure. The jobs piece, and so Katrina was sort of like a climate disaster. 5 years later, we had the BP oil drilling disaster, which was an extraction industry disaster. Connected those dots and began to see climate as a real issue for communities in the Gulf South. But the jobs question, I think, is one I don't hear, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the work of this coalition to bring these two items together. Because in disaster recovery, what happens is there's a lot of rebuilding, right? There's a lot of cleanup and there's a lot of rebuilding. And one thing that you could see in the Katrina zone, and I see it in the Harvey zone and in the Irma zone right now, is that the folks who get those jobs are usually not local. They're usually not the folks who need the work, right? So these are folks, if you think about the way a disaster hits, people are out of work. So folks are looking for jobs. I just talked to, I was just in Texas talking with some folks who have come in from Puerto Rico looking for work because there's no work on the island right now. So who gets the recovery jobs? Who gets those rebuilding jobs? Who gets to clean up? And so that's one phase of it. And then how do we do it, right? In New Orleans, I think we missed big opportunities to rebuild that city in a renewable way. Lots of folks like to say we've got X amount of solar panels, which is great. It's great to have it 12 years later. But what could it have looked like to have renewable energy jobs for local people, especially impacted people, to rebuild the city that they live in and that they're dedicated to the way that would be more sustainable in the earth. And so learning how we get, how black folks especially get left out of things, how poor folks are usually left out of information on how to get training, how to get certified. This really allowed me to connect the work that I've done in climate disaster and jobs together. And I think there's real opportunity for the people that I care most about to really get in on this new wave of renewable energy and construction that happens in climate disaster.
Okay, thank you very much. If anyone has any question they would like to ask Colette at any time, just raise your hand. This has to be, and I see a hand over there trying so hard to come up. Ask your question, please.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to how we also make these recovery jobs safe for the people who are doing them. There's all kinds of toxic chemicals that are released during the hurricanes, and can you talk a little bit about the training that people are getting or should be getting, and the protection so that they don't have to sacrifice their health for the sake of having the job?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate that question, and it sounds benign, right? It sounds like there could just be an answer to it, and there actually is an answer. We have actually pretty good work standards, and that would be great if those standards stayed in place in disaster. But what happens in disaster, what happened after Katrina, for example, there was an emergency declaration from the president to let all of those work standards go so that work could be done quicker, right? So and in the oil and gas zone where we are, and I'm learning a little bit about Philadelphia, but in the Gulf we have a lot of oil and gas refineries. The pollution that happens is, I mean, it's really toxic on a whole other level. But when you relax those requirements, those workers are forced to go back without those requirements that they can, that the companies can be held to. I usually have a slideshow that I do with workshops, and I show pictures of prison labor that was used in Mississippi and South Louisiana to clean up heavy crude after the BP oil drilling disaster. And what was interesting was that prison labor, we should have a whole conversation about how that got used, right? But the worst part of that was that they had no protective gear on. Right? And so they're picking up heavy crude. We know it's poisonous. We know they should have protective gear, but they don't, because there are some lives that are valued more than other lives. So I lived in a very wealthy parish in Louisiana, and I saw all of the folks in my parish, mostly white. They got hazmat training. They got protective gear. They got certification hours. Somebody double checked their breathing apparatus, but that's not what I saw when I went to poor or black areas in Mississippi. It's not what I saw when I saw prison labor used. So the question is a good one, right? What should the standards be? But there's another thing that comes into play in disaster, which is, for whom do the standards get relaxed for, and whose lives are, worth sort of sacrificing. And I think when we were hearing before that we have to talk about race in the middle of this climate conversation, this is the intersection, because that question should be easily answered. What is the protective gear? You should have on protective gear before you touch anything, toxic. That should be the answer. But disaster creates an opportunity for a lot of laws to be relaxed and for a lot of people to be sacrificed. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your question. To Reverend Holston, as was brought up later, our work around climate justice is through our Green Jobs effort. Where can we lift? We're trying to lift at least one person out of 5 people out of poverty. If we were to actually invest and change policies, how do you see green jobs as a pathway for change? And what are the pitfalls we need to avoid?
That's an excellent question. Let me give just a little background of how I've come to this. My grandfather came to Philadelphia with his 7 children and needed to find work, and he was employed by the refinery. So we lived in South Philadelphia, and my family still lives in South Philadelphia because those are where the refineries are. And he was able to raise seven kids, and many of them to college through that salary, which was a union salary, at that refinery. However, as we moved into the same neighborhood with our children, my wife and I, the reality that every day we would see a puff of smoke come out of that refinery. And they would say it was just steam or whatever, and you never really got clarity of what exactly it was. But my church that I grew up at was 24th and Dickinson, Church of Redeemer Baptist, and there was a lot of good men that we buried with very strange diseases, very strange cancers, and they would go quickly. It was, like I say, one day they're working around the church, then literally the next week, 2 weeks, they're gone. And we never made a connection. We never made a real connection of what was being released. Good people that I know very well that died in that community, block leaders who would stay on the block and support the families, who just would, an exotic cancer would happen, they were gone. Finally, my own connection so that I could really understand it was with my own daughter, who, a youngest daughter who had asthma at a very early age. And she was the smallest of our children. Even as a baby, she was the smallest. And so literally we would see every muscle in her body contract as she would have these asthma attacks. And we often took her to the hospital, worried really for her life because of the contractions were that bad when she had asthma. And we had all the asthma equipment, all of the stuff for her, and we were always really concerned about her because of that. We finally found enough dollars to be able to move out of the community. We moved over to South Jersey, and when we moved over to South Jersey, her asthma attack stopped. She was 12, and she never had she's 25 now, she was 12 then. She has never had another asthma attack since we moved out of that neighborhood. And we were able to get rid of all the equipment literally after the first month. And so we knew there was some connection between what was being released and also the exhaust from vehicles, because we were on Mars Street. That's the street where the electrical trolleys come. And so literally I remember films of dirt that's being laid on our porch. Almost every day, we clean, we wash, we clean, we wash, coming back, it was there again. And so we know that through the exhaust, through the closeness of the refinery, that this is a high asthma area, this is a high area for cancer, and all of these deaths, these people, my own family, all of us have been affected by this. And that's one of the reasons that drove me to this work, to say, okay, but my family benefited from this company. My family, you know, they would not have been able to survive if we didn't have this company, because this company was the way my grandfather supported our family. We need to find another way so that the very company that is our financial support is the very ones that are poisoning and killing us at the same time. We need to find a better way to have economics so that we can have the right kind of job, the clean energy we need, and not be toxically poisoning our people at the same time. And that's kind of driven me to be a part of this work as a part of the Economic Dignity team. And then finally, we need more jobs. As a pastor, I'm right into, I was for 6 years a pastor of New Vision Church, and the poverty rates in those areas were 50%. That's 50% poverty rate, 25% deep poverty. Deep poverty is less than $5,500 a year. And there in this city, there's 185,000 people living in deep poverty. So we have a crisis of jobs, a crisis of economics, a crisis of disinvestment in our community, and what's been left is these toxic investments, which are poisoning our community at the same time. We could find another way through clean energy to provide better work, more work for all of us in our community, and have a healthier society at the same time. And that's why I've gotten involved.
Thank you. Nikki, do you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So thanks again for having me. So like Colette and Reverend Holston, I come into this work through the experience of people who have been hurt or been poisoned. So I actually got involved in environmental issues in the 1990s, and this was a time when the military was the world's largest polluter. And I was part of a network called the Military Toxics Network, and I worked with indigenous people whose lands were mined for depleted uranium. And that uranium was used for munitions in the first Gulf War. And then I was also involved with soldiers and nurses from the front lines who came home poisoned, not really knowing why they were sick. And activists in my network discovered that it was the depleted uranium munitions that was not only harming the people and the land in the southwestern part of the country where that substance was mined, but was also harming our military personnel on the front lines. And you know, I really think a lot about how the choices we make about what we extract from the environment can potentially hurt us. Fast forward to today, I'm a volunteer board member of a group called the Asian Pacific Environmental Network. And in the Bay Area, one of the places that this group works is Richmond, California. And Colette must know that Richmond, California is a Chevron refinery town. And you know, California fortunately has some very strong climate policy, and as we go towards a more climate-friendly energy system, what is going to happen for the transition of that town, not only to the workers who work at the refinery, but to the largely Cambodian, Laotian and African American communities that are also part of that community that benefit from small business and other types of industry. You know, I think the connection between our health, our livelihoods, is very interconnected. And Reverend Holston and I spent last week with the Partnership for Working Families Network in the Rocky Mountains. And we had the privilege of hearing from a group called Movement Generation. And they said something that was really profound, which is that, you know, talking about the extractive economy as being the dominant economic system. And so with this dominant extractive economy, we are taking resources out of a finite system, which is Mother Earth, faster than she is able to regenerate. And so what is clear is that the transition is inevitable, because we are either going to have the system collapse unless we intervene, or the system will reorganize if we're intentional about taking action. And so one of the things that really stuck with me from this conversation last week is, again, transition is inevitable, but justice is not. And so what I think we are all here to talk about today is, what does a just transition look like? How can we make sure that as we plan for Philadelphia's clean energy economy, there will be justice? That you all, people in this room, your families, your congregations, you are the ones who are going to make decisions because your lives will be impacted. And so I'm looking forward to the conversation so we can figure out how there's not only a transition to a clean economy, but a transition that is rooted in justice, with you all in this room making decisions over how your lives will be impacted.
Do we have any questions? Somebody must have something in the back of their mind that they want to ask at this point. I don't believe that. No hands are up. Thank you.
Actually, I want to say thank you than anything. I really want to thank you for your last statement around transition is inevitable, justice is not, unless we do something about that. And so I really want to thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Nikki, Richmond is famous for the kind of community organizing that's gone on in the last 5 to 10 years or so. How have people on the ground combined environmental justice with organizing there, so it is able to produce a large coalition? Because I know you've had a large coalition.
Yeah, I'll just say briefly, and I'm sure that folks from Power can also speak to this. The approach is really one of power building and deep democracy. So really putting the voices of workers and community members at the center, really thinking about how what we're doing together is about relationships and our interconnected relationships versus, say, individualism or competition. And so with that framework, with a framework also of abundance versus scarcity, I think we're able to build the type of relationships where we can imagine a different future, where with deep democracy, we can make decisions that are about regeneration versus extraction. That I know that might be a little abstract, but some of the strategies that I think folks are using in Richmond, California are similar to what folks are doing here in Philly. It's a combination of grassroots organizing and leadership development, civic engagement and building our political power, policy and advocacy. And I think one of the things that's really sticking with me in this political moment is really about shifting how we do things. Again, there's enough wealth for everyone. And so really thinking about an abundance strategy versus a scarcity framework, and how we're going to shift relationships and really recognize the interconnectedness of us as people, but also the interconnectedness of us with all living beings.
Thank you. Rosalind, did you have, I see your hand up?
I've just been connected with cooperative businesses, and that seems to me like a sort of nice way of structuring like relationships in a business that's sort of between the sort of small business world and union organizing, which I don't really know much about. So I was just kind of curious, like, what role you see organizing in business structures, like, coming into play.
That question is to Nikki? Or just in general? Okay, can somebody answer that question?
Rosalind wants to take that one, or Sarah that one?
Saying how organizing within business structures connects to climate justice.
Yeah.
Yep. So I can begin to answer that. I was going to sort of just kind of share how I come into this and how labor connects with this stuff in general. But on that, I think unions are absolutely essential, because the reality is, Nikki, I do think that the frame of an extractive economy is the right frame. We live in an extractive economy, period. It extracts from our earth and it extracts from our people. It extracts from all natural resources. We are natural resources, and so is the everything else around us that is natural. And our economy is not designed to respect us. It's designed to create profit, and that's really it. And so unions are one of the few powerful, not the only, that's why we're all in this room, but we are, one of the few powerful checks on that. Workers organized to stand up for themselves is a check on that. So, these, I don't know as much about the role of small businesses in that, but certainly it is the huge multinational corporations that are most at fault in terms of destroying our environment and our ability to live healthy lives on this earth. So I think that, just to give you an example of how that plays out, and I don't actually even have quite the answer to this yet, but I can give you two examples of how companies have kind of no interest in, their interest is purely in making profits or whatever's in the service of that, and workers can check that. So, for example, here in the public schools in Philadelphia, the school district obviously is a public institution that is a budget, but there are private companies that want to come in and provide extremely unhealthy food to our kids, which is still being provided, more and more. And so, and that there's, profit to be made in serving our kids foods that are going to cause diabetes, going to put our kids, which are, overwhelmingly kids of color, overwhelmingly from poor communities in Philadelphia, at risk of chronic diseases. And as a union, for example, this is just one small example, but the workers together can push on their employers and on the district, and we have done that, to actually cook food, right? To actually have full kitchens, actually be able to cook real healthy food for kids rather than buying this frozen stuff that is toxic actually for the kids. As another example, and I've been trying to think of more, and some of the other folks may have other examples of what we've done and what unions have done in general, but in the hotel industry, the participation around some of this stuff, I think, there's a desire to look environmental, so a lot of hotel companies try to market themselves as environmentally friendly, and it is generally not, it's a marketing thing. It isn't really, and it's something to save money. So, for example, many hotels call themselves green hotels. If you've stayed at a hotel recently, they'll say you don't have to get your sheets, washed every single, changed every single day, et cetera, et cetera. And for our membership, that's actually a problem because it's a way of cutting jobs and having housekeepers clean a lot more rooms much more quickly, right? That's what that's really about. There's absolutely the amount of waste that's created in the hospitality industry is tremendous, and there isn't a real interest in doing that. So to think about, ways that workers can figure out ways that we're creating lots of good union jobs, not only in what we're doing to create like these, the jobs that Power is campaigning on right now is a huge priority, but I think there's also other opportunities as we think about campaigns to think about how do we create good jobs for people so that they're doing the work that are also green, that also are that are truly green. So and we can't really we should never be trusting these companies to do that. They need to be.
The jobs that PICO creates tend to be outside of the city.
Thank you for all your comments. Lots going on. My name is Christopher Zeloff. I'm a filmmaker in this field for 25 years now, and recently been doing an eco-district project over in Spring Garden that is about regenerating the neighborhood through ecological design and regenerative technologies. You can find out about it at the ecodistrictphiladelphia.org website. So there are solutions that can be applied to communities, and we've been working on one for a year and a half, coming out of some local universities here, and there are jobs available, and we just got Comcast interested in supporting us. So,
Say that again. Say that a little louder about Comcast.
they want to support us, partner with us,
Okay.
but
Watch your pockets.
somebody. Go to the website, you can read some of it about it. So my question is, how can things accelerate and move beyond just the protest orientation, which I think is good, but doesn't really solve the problem?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I'm part of Power, and Julie's been very active in this area, obviously. Last spring, my wife and I participated in an action that started basically from City Hall, marched down Market Street to Pico, and I really...
Held accountable, and workers can be a huge part of that. So, yeah.
Does anyone else on the panel want to put an answer to that or comment?
I'd like to mention an example that happened a couple of years ago. We commemorated 10 years since Hurricane Katrina, and we had 5-state initiative to bring all these folks who had been impacted at the front line to really come together and declare their survival, their power. But in planning for some of the events that happened during the commemoration, there were 3 cooperatives that were formed, and it wasn't even intentional. One was a water filtration cooperative, because what we said we were not going to do was buy plastic water or water in plastic bottles because it harms the earth. But then how do we keep people hydrated in August in New Orleans, right? So there was a challenge there. And what was interesting was we let the community decide the answer to that question, and they decided that we wanted to use public water in the park. We were in Congo Square, which is an important space for Black folks in New Orleans. We wanted to use public water, but we wanted to filter it. So the young Black men who are chronically unemployed in New Orleans, 40% Black male unemployment in New Orleans. And these young men who have dreads and afros, and they wear their pants in a way that people feel like they need to react to. We have more issues, really. It's totally, leave the pants alone. But anyway, these young men developed the filtration. We also have people who practice traditional African religion and Christianity. They came and they did a ceremony that morning to bless the water. And then we put all these young men to work, and they filtered tons of water, and they filtered the ice for the water, and they provided water and compostable cups for 4 days in Congo Square for anybody who went through. And we had a zero waste event. And now those young men are actually called to other festivals. So they did the reggae festival, they're going to the Southern Movement Assembly next weekend, and now they get paid to provide clean filtrated water. But when they do, and when you get your little water and you put it in, they talk to you about the human right to clean water. Because there's a bigger issue here. Like, you should all have access to clean water. Why isn't the water in our parks clean? Why can't you just go to a water fountain and drink it? These are issues, and if we keep supporting the privatization of water, we not only hurt the earth, but we empower these companies that are really trying to hurt us. And we think we're doing something right when we buy bottled water, right? It's a trend, it's clean, we can depend on it. But I think, like you were saying about, like, if I don't wash my towels, I'm helping the earth. That's not the basis of these companies. They're not thinking like that, and we've got to have a better analysis around it. So it was the community that came together for an event. Out of that came a cooperative business that employs specifically young Black men who are chronically unemployed. They have that cooperative business, they own that model together, and they split any dollars that they get. But it was the basis of them doing that was organizing around climate justice, and 10 years since Katrina. So it started out of organizing, and it ended up being a business. Not everybody's going to go to the Capitol steps or the city council meeting. I think we as activists need to get out of that frame. Like, we actually need everybody in the community. You need the business owners, you need the teachers, you need the nurses, you need the folks who are going to yell on the microphone, and together you can make change. And this was an example of when we saw the young men step up, make their own financial viability happen through a cooperative business model that was rooted in organizing.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you. Any other comments? We are facing worsening climate disasters, hurricanes and fires, deeper racism, more repressive governance, attacks on the right to unionize and protect workers. How do we navigate the complexities of injustice today in our work? And anybody can answer. I see your lips moving, Rev.
No, I'm just trying to breathe. I mean, that's such a broad question. I think the partnership between Power and Equate, 20% rooftop solar by 2025, with the goal of creating 4,000 jobs in North Philadelphia and communities of like North Philadelphia that are in job crisis and have been in job crisis for an emergency state for the last 50 years, is the very kind of thing that we need to be able to do, because again, it puts clean energy at the center, which is good for all our entire humanity. It also puts jobs at the center because it's going to the people who need them the most. It takes and extracts, instead of them extracting from us, we're extracting wealth from PICO and other places where the money goes away from the community. I think we said that PICO makes in Philadelphia $1 million a day in profit alone. And that profit leaves the city, it does not go to the citizens of the city. We're going to squeak a little more.
Okay.
And I wanted to add to that, we love squeaking with Power. I work with the Earthquake Action Team, or Equate also. I think we're in a time of increased activism on a lot of issues, and it's a great time to learn from history. Yes. That if we think back to successful movements in the past, it was never one action that won anything.
Yeah.
You know, the Montgomery bus boycott, they didn't walk for a day, they walked every day for over a year. And you can look at any win in that way. And so I think it's sometimes, you know, maybe people just heard about one action, but to understand that it's building power over time. We have actually, in 2 years of the Power Local Green Jobs campaign, gotten many signs from PICO, like Terry said, that they are really nervous. That
are key first steps in moving in the direction that we're trying to go.
So at the Partnership for Working Families, we've been learning a lot from working with communities across the country around development and community benefits agreements, and more of our cities are doing what you're doing and trying to figure out how the transition, going from, you know, your goal of 20% local renewable energy by 2025 to creating policies and then monitoring. And we've already talked about a number of those things. They include job access. And this one I think is really important in communities like Philadelphia, because we need to figure out how to do targeted hiring to make sure that communities don't continue to get left behind. We need to figure out how to ban the box so that you know, returning citizens have an equal shot at a job. You know, we also need to make sure that we partner with pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs that exist in sectors where we have union partners, and make sure also that there are standards like living wage or project labor agreements. Some of the things that we don't pay enough attention to, I think, is around the implementation, the monitoring, the enforcement, and so we try to really talk about what we're learning there. And that means really figuring out who are your partners in the workforce development system. You know, who knows the communities that need access to these jobs and what type of additional training they may need, for example. Or if you're talking about solar, are there ways that you can bundle up smaller projects to make them more feasible? And then monitoring and enforcement, really thinking through ways to institutionalize that. Make sure that there's reporting requirements that are publicly available. In Oakland, when we worked on a jobs policy, we had the city council create an advisory committee that was appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council, so that there would be a legally standing citizen advisory board that could review information and be empowered to make corrections so that the jobs policy was passed. And there's a lot more I could potentially say about this, but I do want to say that we've got sister organizations in New York and LA and elsewhere who are learning a lot as they go. In terms of solar, our group in LA really wanted to make sure that low-income communities could both access solar and get those jobs. And they actually did a map of where existing solar panels are, and not surprisingly they found solar deserts in low-income communities, communities of color. And so one of the things that they're experimenting with is a program whereby the utility makes the investment in the panels, and the family will lease those panels at about $360, I think, annually, so that the cost is much more accessible for low-income families. They're also piloting something where there's what's called shared solar, so putting solar on public buildings that lower-income families can then have access to. And so, it takes a lot of creativity, and I think one of the things that the partnership can offer is working with Power and our affiliates and allies to talk with you about what are your goals and demands. And we have a great policy and legal team that I like to say can take your community demands and help write them in legal language so that they're bulletproof by your city attorney or whomever you are trying to pass that policy with.
Okay, thank you. We would like to take some time where we want you to get into smaller groups. And there are 3 questions that we would like you to look at. You can take either one of them. Issue today. Anybody. Thank you.
So somebody reported here that their major concern that they were hearing was people who need these energy jobs are not being effectively represented to have access to these jobs and training.
Okay.
So it's the access to even knowing about the jobs or having, it's just not even on their radar.
Right.
So there's no representation.
Okay.
That was sort of a resonance that turned into a concern.
Okay.
Another one was solar. Somebody made the comment that tax advantages are about to run out for most solar initiatives. However, somebody else said, but nonprofits are outside of those rules. So that doesn't have to be a picture of gloom ahead, because the nonprofits are still, effectively able to get tax cuts. Is that right? Yes, okay. And I guess somebody else said that the thing that really impacted them was hearing of someone up there.
Well, a lot of our questioning and comments focused on disaster situations. And I'm just going to read to you what I managed to write down. In a disaster, how do we do things locally and create aid that will help people? And this led into okay, what are some successful examples in New Orleans where people organize to resist disaster capitalism? In other words, the vultures that come in and try to make a profit out of helping in a disaster zone. So are there examples, and this is a question to the panel, of successful, attempts by people to organize and help and resist the vultures? And I know there were a lot of vultures. I heard a lot. Their whole school system got taken over by for-profit charters. Let's see. How do we generate the capital needed to make the large-scale changes that are needed, and at the same time accomplish racial and economic justice. So it's really a question of the expense and, making sure that things are done in a just way, which is everybody's saying that. Okay, another question is, how do we avoid the big companies like Pico completely dominating the energy scene? Do we decentralize? Do we have energy co-ops? Do we make it a public utility? But how do we avoid the, big mega private monopoly controlling the sun eventually and the wind and privatizing that?
Two.
Beg pardon?
We're kind of split in two.
We're what?
Seems like there's two
We
tables.
did it as two tables.
Okay, so you've got some answers and you've got some answers. Okay, no problem.
Yeah, but our answers are better than their answers.
Coming up mostly with the problems. They were much easier to identify than the solutions. But one of them, so we talked about, absolutely the best jobs would probably be union jobs, but in Philadelphia in particular, we have to figure out ways to open up certain of the unions so that they actually would hire the people or let the people in who need these jobs. And they are often people of color. And so one suggestion was that the city would need to develop better enforcement mechanisms, at least for those jobs that the city contracts with unions to do, to have requirements around geography and ethnicity, race, and be able to enforce them so that if a union doesn't do what it's supposed to, maybe it can't apply, put in for another job. We spoke about regulations from the Public Utility Commission that sort of push the idea that you have to that the utility has to purchase the least expensive energy. On the other hand, we have consumers have the right to demand that their energy be provided by certain by providers that, let's say, are 100% solar or something like that, but those consumers need to pay more for that energy so that it's not, in a sense, it's not costing the utility company any more to go purchase that more expensive energy. And so we talked about needing to do a lot of marketing work and maybe regulatory to loosen up that system so that it would be easier for people who can't, it would be possible for people who can't afford to pay more to nevertheless demand and get their energy from renewable sources.
Related to that also was educating people to demand more solar. And we talked about not only formal education, but also approaches using arts and literature and trying to pull the arts community into promotion of solar and other renewables.
And something that I thought of and didn't get a chance to share was the whole notion of what something costs. The simple answer is, well, it's something about cubic feet of gas. But what about the cleanup costs afterwards, or the health costs? Could maybe developing ways to look at cost differently, which would be part of that educational process, because then people would realize that, okay, it looks like the gas is cheaper, but.
So that's our orientation. Do demonstration projects to show how it can be done. Also build case studies of other places that are doing it. Someone spoke about Germany and Denmark. I've been to those places, and part of it is the government gives incentives for it to happen at the highest level. And recently was in Austin, Texas, where they have an eco district that's very advanced, and they have mandatory green building codes in the downtown. That's why they have an eco district and green buildings. Where in Philadelphia, we give a 10-year tax abatement for new construction, and we have no advanced green buildings that I can see around here, and the developers don't get it, so they have to be incentivized. Texas, they had 7 developers, even Trammell Crow, investing in an eco district because of their mandatory green building requirements. Very simple, and they have an electric avenue for electric cars. So it's part of the idea of being on the side of the transforming energy. That's how the young people get involved. That's how rock and roll took over in the 50s and 60s. So build on that, and I don't agree with the protest and union approach, and that's just my bias. I think, you need both, but the most effective is demonstration. That's why someone like Comcast will get involved, because they're bottom line people. They want to see it, and when you see it, you believe it.
Very good. The question that came up for our group and the solutions. So I think, a question really came up around the intersections between race and economic justice, right? And that a lot of what we're talking about is the intersections of different kinds of oppressions, and that we can't have a conversation about any one of them without bringing up the others. So in tandem with thinking about intersections, I think one of the things that we thought about too was that in addition to thinking about how to get businesses to give people jobs, that we should also be thinking about how we create our own ownership opportunities, right? And so thinking about the intersections of what does it take to construct an infrastructure that would provide that for us, right? So that's education and training, it's an understanding of our economic systems, it's an understanding of what ownership, responsibility, and opportunities look like. It's taking advantage of the opportunity to create the practice of deep democracy in our communities through how we express our entrepreneurial aspirations, and that these opportunities all exist in cooperative economics.
In the Black community as a whole, the orientation really of the environmental movement and the climate justice movement has to change. It really starts with what she just said: cooperative economics, jobs, 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 and more jobs. And you're not really going to be able to organize the African American community, I'm saying specifically, I think communities of color as a whole, but particularly what I know, the African American community, unless that's what you're talking about. And the byproduct of that would be a better community, and the byproduct of that would be a sustainable environment, and the byproduct of that would be a healthier environment. And so it means this is not an add-on to what you're already doing. This is a reorientation of everything you're doing, and seeing it from the aspect of how do we take a community that is really in devastation right now and has been in devastation, and how do we infuse greater wealth opportunities for that community through climate justice. And so that's a challenge of how you're orienting your way you're thinking about it, because I know saving the world is saving the world. We want to save the world. But if you want to organize the Black community, the world is economic opportunity. All right? So doesn't mean you give up your principles or your thoughts. It just means shift a little bit in the thinking and put a focus on, I got to save people as well as saving the globe. That makes sense to people?
Yeah, it does. I like the word serve better than save. You're getting into redemption stuff there.
Yeah, well, okay. I'll leave the.
That's where he comes from.
That's the preacher part of me, but the idea is you're not coming as saviors. You're coming in to collaboratively work with the community that's present on the needs of that community. Yes, that community is setting the agenda for what it wants. Right. And if you want to organize around these issues, come and see what the community needs and orient yourself around those needs, and that's the way we can build real coalition together.
Pastor, I just want to add, in terms of languaging, because this is an issue of languaging. Social justice has always been prominent in our communities, runs parallel to our environmental justice. Colette said we need to move the definition of what that means and compound those things to kind of formulate language that involves everyone and not exclude anyone. It literally comes down to formulating from a social entrepreneurship that their values and the context are different. Okay? But as an entrepreneur, in the traditional sense, profit is the context. Here, it's social justice and all the things that align itself to changing that paradigm.
But it's not just social justice, it's community wealth building. So I'm not building community wealth for myself.
No. I'm clear on that.
Yeah.
But that's in alignment to what was said before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So if we're going to dicker on language, we need to understand what are we exposing or what are we really talking about.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I had some answers to like the disaster question, but I think I want to shake this up a little bit.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to offend most of you. So I want to just ask you to take a deep breath and receive the love that I am about to offer.
I receive it.
So, we are speaking. This conversation is happening as privileged Americans. It's basically what this conversation is, right? And the conversation is rooted in often what we can build, what we can consume, solar panels included, right? But the truth of the matter is if we actually shut down one coal-fired power plant, you can dramatically reduce what's going into the air to help accelerate the climate crisis, right? Our solutions, my point is our solutions cannot always be rooted in our consumption and our desire to oppress and dominate, even if it's land, right? So we can't put art and beauty on top of something that is still part of oppression. It doesn't make it not oppression, it makes it pretty oppression. And this is what we see in gentrification, right? It's always real lovely, but someone just got displaced, some community just got broken, some power just got taken, and I think we need to examine our solutions. When our solutions continue our consumption, we're going in the wrong direction. We're going in the wrong direction. The silicate from solar panels come from somewhere. They're being extracted from communities in South America that we're not even talking about. Because our solutions right now are about what we can buy, purchase, and do. And sometimes the solution is about stopping the harm that we're doing. And I want to put that out there, not because solar panels are the enemy, and not because things are right or wrong, but because our orientation around solution can't continue to be us dominating and creating consequences around the globe that we have no accountability for. And Pastor, when you were talking, you're right. When you want to talk in the Black community, you have to talk about wealth. That's true. But I think now is the time for us to change some of these truths. Because what we cannot do as a people reclaiming our humanity, I'm talking to my white brothers and sisters, and as a people finding our power, I'm talking to my Black brothers and sisters. What we cannot do is accept the oppressive definitions, accept the oppressive systems, and recreate them. Why not redefine wealth? Why not redefine work? Why not actually ask folks what they want? Do people really want job? Hopefully it's a union job if you got to do it. But what is it that you really want? Do you want food, clothing, a school, a hospital? Does that equal working for somebody? I think cooperative economics, as the sister was saying, is the right way to go. But cooperative economics doesn't mean money. Ask the African cultures and the Asian cultures and the indigenous cultures that existed with cooperative economics for generations, for thousands of years. This is a new construct and we're accepting it. Yes. And it's not helpful. Yeah. Not only is it not helpful, It's harmful. It's so bad, it's destroying the planet. Not just a group of people that you don't like because they look a different way, and not just a group of people you don't like because they didn't vote the way you did. It's destroying the planet. What are we really saying? Do we have to buy everything? Do we have to build everything? Do we have to oppress everything? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think what we need is real organizing. This was one of the questions that the facilitator asked. You know, what kind of, I think we need this policy work. I think we've got to get involved. The civic participation, we've got to increase it. At the same time, it's time for us to take over our communities. It's time for us to take over our future. That means we have to re-innovate language. In fact, let's just stop talking. Because it gets us into trouble. You gotta save, no, you gotta serve. No, this is the bullshit that keeps us from working together. This is it. That word in your word, that color in your color, that side in your side. No, y'all, it's time to actually figure out where we align and go from there. And it's hard because we know we want to be right. We want to be leaders. We want to be the innovators. This is what this Western white male patriarchal education that we are all, every single color of us, have been educated into. We believe this. This is going to take humility. This is going to take innovation, and this is going to take us to think in ways we have not thought about. The system that we have right now has created our situation. We have to change our situation. That means we got to do something different, and we can't buy ourselves out of it. And I say this with love, this last point. There are these concepts. One is called internalized racial superiority, and one is called internalized racial inferiority. And we're going to have to deal with big questions like white supremacy, like consumption, like mass production. That's where we got to go, or else everything we build is going to get us to the same exact results. We're going to have to build power in people who feel like they have no power. And we're going to have to balance power in people who think they have all the right answers and the right to tell other people what they need. This is hard work. Nobody wants to do this, and it's tension, and you're gonna need more sandwiches and a lot of cookies and probably some whiskey. But this is the long-term work. This is actually where we have to go, and there are answers and there are solutions. But the premise from which we start is where we really have to make some changes. And I say that with love and deep appreciation for people spending their time in this work. But I think this is where we're going to have to go. We're going to have to redefine this construct that we've been put inside.
All right, thank you so much. Okay. So can we have a last word on the end there, please? Did we leave you anything?
Well, I just in listening to what folks are, some of the comments, and also with what Colette was just saying, I do think we do need to, well, my feeling, I think, would be that in Philadelphia, I think, with these campaigns, I do think we need to figure out how we broaden who's involved in these campaigns and just in terms of and building a movement for real justice around these issues, because and I do think that I agree that doing that requires I do think some of the reluctance for a lot of working class organizations and organizations, primarily people of color, has been about not really taking on the issues of white supremacy even within the movement. And so I do think that it requires taking that on. I think that it also requires taking on this thing of reproducing what we talk about. I do worry about that a lot in the environmental movement. When we begin to talk about simple solutions to things, because buying our way out of things, I think that is 100% right, we are, I think there is lip service to racial equality, even if there isn't a practice of racial equality. There's lip service to gender equality, even if there isn't a practice. There isn't actually a lip service to class equality. We have accepted a system we've accepted that in our country. That's true. So pretty much any solution you do is going to replicate that. Any business solution will replicate that in some way. And so there needs to be a pretty explicit conversation, because there's really no way out of that. That is a reality of the situation in our country and our world. So how are we? You can't buy your way out of it. In other words, you can't opt out. There isn't an easy way to opt out of that. And I think that has also been some of the solutions within the environmental movement have been ones of sort of opting out or opt-out culture, and that isn't an option for a lot of people. So I think we need to we need to be very explicit, I think even more explicit, in how we're taking on our economy and taking on white supremacy in the movement, as well as in our campaigns overall. So
thank you. Ms. Nikki, would you want? Hold on a second, Nikki, and then if there is a last question. I know, because we're already past our time. You all know that because you see the clock up there, okay? So work with me here.
Yeah, just briefly,
Nikki?
It's a real pleasure to be on this panel and in this room. There's hard work ahead of us, which you all have talked about already. We're really, as a national network, also trying to work on dismantling the interlocking systems of oppression that we've talked about today, and really build something new. And of course it's hard work, but I think the thing that's exciting about it is the energy that folks like you have around attacking those systems of oppression head on, and also imagining something new that we can build together, so that we're building new systems that are not based on domination and colonialism and all the other isms that have been harming our communities. And I think one thing I'm going to take away as someone who works with a national network, who was organized over the past couple minutes by some of you, is just really leveraging the role that we can play being connected to multiple communities to create more spaces for learning together and for strategizing together. And so I am really looking forward to following up this conversation with you all in Philadelphia and figuring out how we can learn together with the other cities that we're connected with.
Thank you so much. I know that you want to say something. I just want to say, if it was easy, anybody could do it, okay? But they didn't. So we know it's hard. Okay.
Great. So I just want to say this. Thank you. I'll thank the panel in a second. But this was put together by a group of folks. So people have the white shirts with the power shirts on. If you can just stand up real quick, because this was about 15 people. Not everyone's here today. Some people were here yesterday. But there's 15 people of power. A lot of meetings, a lot of conversations. So I just want to let you all know this is a very deeply cooperative efforts at Power. And two, I just want to thank you all so much for sharing your wisdom, your lived experience, your expertise, your knowledge. I've known Colette for about 7 years, and I've been wanting her to come up to Philly for a long time. So I'm really excited she's here, and I'm really all glad you got to connect with Colette.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Nikki I've known less, but I've been familiar and connected with Partnership Working Families in different areas of work over the last couple of years, and so I'm super excited to have a national organization also come to Philly, because Philly always gets overlooked, so I'm really excited for Nikki to come and share. Reverend Holston for sticking with us and taking the lead. Rosalind, who, if you all didn't know, got arrested last week around hotel organizing. Rosalind, for stepping out of your comfort zone and coming here to speak. I think part of what we are hoping to do at Power is try to make those connections and build together, and so I just appreciate you being here and speaking to this panel.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So we have thank you to Francis for facilitating.
Yeah.
So we have bags and T-shirts for all you.
And we have a raffle drawing.
And we have a raffle.
Got a raffle drawing too? All that before I get Reverend Halston to pray us out?
Yeah.
Power bag.
Okay.
I got one. I got one yesterday. Thank you.
I got a power bag.
That's number 23?
Yeah, no, that's the cups. I got plenty cups.
Okay, raffle, let's do this.
Okay, so when everyone signed in, you were automatically entered into a raffle to win some Power Flash. And I'm gonna announce the raffle winners right now. So, Gail Mershon.
This is so great.
Next up is Clark.
Oh, was I supposed to?
And our last one is Sheila Weinberg.
Oh my goodness.